Hi, we come to the end of the story of the father and the two sons today, with the elder son not happy with the father's embrace of the younger son. And this, of course, is why I've not been calling this the parable of the prodigal son as it traditionally is, because it's plainly the story of the father and the two sons. Because as we've been seeing, and as you can see on the right side of the screen, this story, along with this entire this entire section, all the way up to 1710, is addressed to the two pairs of people we see in what I mark in the blue here as the preface: the tax collectors and sinners who were coming near to listen, as Jesus had called people to do, to listen, and the Pharisees and the scribes who are grumbling because he welcomes sinners and eats with them. And so we've been seeing that both the parables of the lost sheep and the coin, but these two parables together, the story of the father and the two sons, and the story of the manager of injustice that we'll see following this, are tightly connected, and we've been looking at those connections as we've been going. So today we're really going to see what's at stake in the elder brother, who at one level is an expression of the Pharisees, but another level, depending upon how we read the story, is an expression of Ephraim, or Israel, the northern kingdom that was destroyed by Assyria and is being called back, according to Jeremiah's view and Hosea's view, by Yahweh. Of course, that's deep in historical past, but Luke could certainly be using that as one level of the story. We've been looking at examples of that. The other is the more immediate one I was just noting, is that with the Pharisees as the elder son and the tax collectors and sinners identifying with the younger son. But another way that we were focusing on, especially last time with all the gifts from the father, is the contrast between two economic systems: how the mammon of injustice, the younger son's desire to have all this inherited wealth for nothing, just because he thinks he deserves it, has divided the family up, and he lost all of it. And now the father's gifts of the ring and the robe and the fatted calf are what bring them back together. So we can also hear this as a story of two different economic systems. And as such, the elder brother represents the people in Luke's audience, the Roman elite, who find the father's behavior to be ridiculous. And as I've been noting from cross-cultural studies from current-day scholars, whether that was Park in North Korea, or LaHerd working with women from Arab and Yemeni communities, who all understand, and also, as we saw, Lopez working with folks in Colombia, that the elder son here represents the enforcers of the status quo. The people who keep rebellious younger people, if you will, or rebellious oppressed people in their place. And so we could certainly understand why the tax collectors and the so-called sinners in the story, as well as oppressed people these days, would find the elder brother's view of refusing to celebrate a rejection of the gift economy. And as well, we can hear it as a recollection of what we saw in chapter 14, when Jesus told the wealthy people, when you have a feast, a banquet, don't invite your rich friends or neighbors who can repay you, but invite the poor, the blind, and the lame. And then we saw the story about the feeble excuses for why they wouldn't come. And when we looked at that at the time, we noted they wouldn't come because they don't want to be associated with someone who breaks the rules and blurs the lines between the people on the top and the people at the bottom. And for Jesus, there is no top and bottom, there's just the circle of everybody. But as we saw those people give their fake excuses, here the elder son doesn't have fake excuses. He says directly what's going on. And so that's what we're going to see here, is the revealing of what's going on here. And that anticipates what we'll see after the next parable, where Jesus offers some words of summary, referring to the Pharisees. The narrator refers to the Pharisees as silver lovers, but Jesus refers to them as those who justify themselves, and as the narrator told us much earlier, refuse to participate in God's plan. And so that's what we're seeing with the Pharisees at that level of the story. And as I was also noting in each of these videos, there's also the level that's most popular of all, is the Henry Nouwen level, where people can see themselves throughout the ages, and especially these days, as any of the characters in the story at different times in our journey. And so many different ways to read the story, but I want to focus on the role of the elder brother in the story as we move into it. And as we noted, there's a separate chiastic structure for this half that's missing its last piece, because we don't hear the response at the end. So we have this frame missing its last piece, a nice little structural thing that Luke has done there. We've also been looking at the key words and noting father and son and lost, but here's celebrate. Notice the celebration twice for the successful celebration, and celebrate twice here for the refusal to enter into the celebration. I've been noting along the way, and I decided it was worth putting in one place to highlight how special this passage is. All the words that are in this story that are either unique here or almost unique here. So I've color-coded these, as you can see there. It's self-explanatory. And all these words that you can see in the story are either only here, only one other time in Luke, and some of them only here in the New Testament, and a few of them only here in the Bible. So Luke is really calling upon a wide vocabulary, and a vocabulary not matched anywhere else. And I also finally want to put up here, which is going to be relevant for what we're going to see here, the claiming and disclaiming the prodigal son, which is also to say disclaiming the tax collectors and sinners. Are they going to be people that we welcome as brothers and sisters, or more broadly as siblings, or are they people that we're going to say these are yours and not ours? So let's look at our story as we go. He became angry, orgasthe, and only one other time. It's one of those words. Maybe I'll leave the rare words up here. And let's look at that one because it's relevant to our immediate situation here. So this is in another story that Jesus told about the refusal of the people to come to the banquet. So the owner of the house became angry and said, go out and force all these people in. And so it's really the flip side of the story. Here, the elder son is angry because those people have been invited. And in the story in 14:21, the owner of the house is angry because his invited guests have refused to come. In other words, they've acted like the elder son, which would lead us to expect the father to be angry here. And certainly according to the archetype of that would be the case. But the father will not be angry, as we'll see. So he became angry and he refused to go in, or literally did not wish to enter, as Bailey notes below, rejecting his customary role as second in charge of a feast, and thus deliberately insulting the father. And of course that would be known to everybody. The elder son would be, as Bailey's saying, the father's right-hand man. He'd be expected to be welcoming everybody in the party, and instead he's pouting outside. As Joel Green notes, a symbolic act of gargantuan proportions. And then his father came out and began to plead with him. And that's as shocking as the father running out to meet the prodigal son. Imagine this esteemed elder man who's got adult children, who obviously has a whole horde of slaves and hired hands, and there must be a huge crowd to celebrate here, unlike the person with the lost sheep that was found, or the coin that was found, that just calls their friends and neighbors. This is someone who can have quite the celebration, including killing the fatted calf. And yet the father came out and began to plead with him. The very fact of him coming out is, of course, against the dignity and the sense of the father's role. But then beginning to plead or beg, as my note below says, the verb parakaleo can be translated a number of ways, as it is in different parts in Luke. Earlier as exhorted, around John the Baptist exhorting people, as appealed with the centurion appealing, as begged with the man possessed by the legion here, and then in the next chapter where Lazarus is comforted. And so we see the range of views, and of course it's related to paraclesis, as we see the paraclete in John's gospel, which can be both an advocate and a comforter. So here he's begging with him, pleading with him, again, totally below dignity. And we don't hear what his pleading is. We just hear the narrator say that. But we hear completely the elder son's response. As Marshall notes, he admits any respectful address to his father, criticizes him, and casts aspersion on his brother's character. The Noah's Feed is something very strange here. It translates a word that means look as listen, idu, which means look, or it can mean behold in the positive sense of wonder and wow, but it can also mean look, like look, in that harsh sense, and hence translating listen. But it's an imperative, and it's certainly suggesting not what the elder son says here, which is that he's like working like a slave. And someone working like a slave, being treated like a slave, would not speak that way to their master. So he's torn in it, just as the elder son was torn in his own thought of treat me as if I was one of your hired help. For all these years, and there's the phrase etuseta eto there, I've been working like a slave. It's a particular word here, doleuo, I am slaving. And we hear it twice here. As it is we hear it twice in this passage, and one other time in Luke here, 16:13, and so that's just one more connection between this passage and the one of the manager and what Jesus says afterwards. So whereas the younger son wanted to be treated as if he was hired help, the elder son says he's been doing exactly that. He's been working like a slave, which is to say not getting paid and following orders. And he underscores that by saying, I've never disobeyed your command. Notice his never is balanced with the Father's always down here. And there's a sound play that we lose in English. The never is ode pote, and the always is pantote. So we hear that similarity there. So I've never disobeyed your command. I've never passed by your command is another way to put it. As Marshall notes, cast the elder as the Pharisee-like objector to the easy way of Jesus that violates the Sabbath, accepts sinners, etc. So he sees faithfulness as a son to working like a slave and being completely obedient to the commands of a father. Is that the kind of relationship that Jesus envisions God wants people to have with each other or with God? And yet there we see it. So, yet, you have never given me even a young goat, which even a young goat suggests like the most minimal possible thing. Eraphon here, again, one of those words that we see is only here in Luke. The only other time is in Matthew's little story about the sheep and the goats and the separation at the Last Judgment. So notice what the elder son's saying. He's saying that a family operates on balanced reciprocity. A notion that Jesus rejected in general, but certainly families don't operate that way. Families almost always operate on the gift economy. Doesn't yours? Mine has. We don't charge our children for food. We don't make them work for their clothes. We give them things because we love them, and it's our responsibility to give things to and care for our children. And similarly, children would do household tasks as part of a unit, not to get paid. So this son has seen his relationship with his father as completely transactional. Is that what we're supposed to understand of Luke's portrayal of the Pharisees' relationship with God, or of the Roman elite's relationship with the empire, that it's completely transactional based on this kind of reciprocity? And certainly that would be. And that's what we saw in the previous chapter 14 around the invitations of the banquet. Don't invite your rich friends and neighbors that they may repay you by inviting you back. So it didn't even give me a young goat, so I might celebrate with my friends. Notice not with you and with the family and with our neighbors, but his own personal friends. He sees himself as completely separate from the family. And in our Western world, that's certainly so. A young adult person would not necessarily celebrate with the parents' friends, but this is not the Western world. This is a world where extended family is all family, and he's certainly living at home, as we can see. And so we would expect he would celebrate with the family, not just with his friends. As Bailey notes in relation to that, with this comment, the older son declares he is not a part of the family. And he underscores that further in his response here, and I'll scroll down a little farther so we can see the rest of our passage here. And as my note below says, every element in this version is skewed from what was reported. And that's a nice little comment from Luke too, is that events happen, but different people give different perspectives. And we can see that could be true about the role of Jesus in the world, and we could hear the Roman perspective, or the Sanhedrin and Jerusalem's perspective, or we can hear Luke's perspective, the perspective of the poor and others. So that's a little subtext of what's going on, that stories can be told from different perspectives. But when this son of yours, and that brings up this element here, he had said your brother, the servant had said your brother, but the elder says now this son of yours came back who has devoured your property. Notice not even our property, which the father will say it is. And that will echo into 2047, where Jesus warns against those who devour widows' houses and their property with bios here, that we see here as bios. Devoured your property with prostitutes, which we had not heard. The narrator only told us of dissolute living, but had not specified. How would the elder brother know? He plainly doesn't really know. As Vincent notes below, the elder brother has no idea how the younger brothers lived, but imagines the worst. As Bailey notes, it's suggesting an attempt to accuse the brother of a violation of the law subject to the death penalty, according to Deuteronomy 21. As Laherd, again writing from the perspective of working with Arab and Yemeni women, notes, if true, constitutes the worst shame that he could cause his family. Dudko, writing from the Joseph Campbell myth perspective, says the archetype of the temptress, which is to say the prostitute. So the elder son is falling right into using all the symbols and understandings that would make his brother who he disclaims as being his brother, look the worst possible. And yet you, the father, killed the fatted calf for him. What a contrast he's saying. I've been a slave and obedient, and I've not even gotten a young goat to celebrate with my friends, but this son of yours has devoured your property, the prostitutes, and you killed the fatted calf. And the answer is, yes, that's exactly what I did. But the father doesn't say that. And notice what the father could say. He could say, how dare you? Or go, I want you to go talk to your younger brother right now and make it up. Or you bet I'm not going to give you anything when you speak to me that way. Those could all be expected responses, but instead we get this. The father said to him, son. Affirming that. And he uses teknon here, more affectionate than huios, the generic term for son. As the father ignores all the dishonoring words of the elder, just as he ignored the dishonoring behavior of the younger. Exactly as Abraham says to the rich man in 16:25, as we'll see, another thing connecting this. You are always with me. So as he said, I've never disobeyed you. You are always with me. Pantote, only one other time in Luke, as we see. And with me, met emo, is certainly something that would suggest a divine sense of that, of Yahweh being with you, although I've resisted seeing this as an allegory where the Father is God, but certainly we can affirm that Jesus' vision of God is that God has characteristics like this Father does. And all that is mine is yours. Notice that not all that is mine will be yours when I die. All that is mine is yours now. And as my note below has, affirming that despite the younger's return, the elder remains entitled to the remaining estate. Similarly, the Pharisees and scribes to whom these parables are addressed, at least in part, should not feel deprived because God's house is open to those who are lost but have returned. And one might say the same thing to the Romans in the audience, that they can still live as well as they've been living as long as they invite those who don't have access to what they have, and it doesn't take anything away from them. And we'll see how Jesus speaks about that after the next parable. But as we end this one here, as my note below has, the status of the elder son is left ambiguous. Bailey suggests the possibility of a lost last parallel that would complete the scene, deliberately omitted to engage the reader's own reflection. But I doubt that. I think that Luke is enough of a composer here that he left it open. He left it open for readers, and he left it open for us, reading eventually, to ask ourselves the question, what would we do in that situation? Do we feel that life is something where you get rewarded for your hard work, or is life a gift? And that goes to the very essence of the difference between what I call the religion of empire and the religion of creation, the difference between the Roman world overseen by the gods of Olympus and the created world overseen by Yahweh, the creator God. But as the Father says, we had to celebrate. It was imperative, dei, which is a word usually referring to divine necessity, and we can see it here. We had to celebrate. It's a divine imperative to celebrate and to rejoice together, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found, echoing what he said earlier in response to that, to the sense of celebration, of why they were celebrating, and here it is again. Notice in the end, no sense of chastisement, no sense of repentance from the younger son, no sense of moral change. Simply someone was dead and is alive, someone was lost and has been found, and we had to celebrate. Can those of us who see ourselves as the obedient elder siblings, those who follow the rules and have been good boys and girls, fully embrace the call to include those who have not, who have come late to a party in their own name? See you next time as we enter the story of the unjust manager. Bye-bye.